to sort of change subjects a little bit here, at the very beginning of the stream tonight, you said that you had been the first one to publish a comprehensive, case for mythicism. The first one in 100 years, just about 100 years when you published, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, apparently Chrissy has some problems with that particular claim.
Yeah.
So we'll just jump right into what Chrissy has to say about the earliest, I guess, academic treatment of mythicism.
There's one more thing I forgot to mention. In 1993, we actually get arguably the first major mythicist publication in academia since basically Arthur Drew's time, and this is Jean Magne's from Christianity to Gnosis and from Gnosis to Christianity or something like that. This is published in 1993, and contrary to Richard Carrier and everyone else who tries to claim that he was the first peer-reviewed published systematic account of a mythicist Christianity, blah, blah, blah. No. Jean Magne did this in 1993, and it was published in the Brown Judaic Studies series. And for notes, that is an actual university series. Like, this is from Brown. Not only that, the book was endorsed by Jacob Neusner. And for those who don't know, he was one of the most well-known scholars of ancient Judaism and also like Talmudic and Midrashic Judaism in living memory. In fact, I think at one point he was holding the world record for the most publications with his name on them.
Yeah. So Jean Magne, maybe.
French. In French, yeah. Magne. Half of that is false. Everything else is true. The stuff about Neusner and the peer-reviewed status of the publication. But trivial thing, it's not. I don't think it's a big criticism. Is the 1993 book is actually a republication of separate stuff that was published in the late 80s. So the 1993 publication it's all in one place, and it's in this particular peer-reviewed series, and it has the Neusner introduction and all of that. So 93 is a fair date to put on it, although it had been published before that, but not many years before that. But that book has never once talks about mythicism. It talks about, so there's near the end in the concluding chapter, which is like the sort of conclusion or evaluation. It spends a couple pages on the possibility that Jesus didn't exist. It doesn't argue that Jesus didn't exist. It doesn't present any case for the origins of Christianity without a historical Jesus. It doesn't do any of that. It just mentions that there's a possibility and talks about it a little bit, but it does not argue for it. None of the thesis of the book is that Jesus didn't exist. The book has nothing to do with that. It is about how the Gospels in particular, and the Christian gospel, in broad sense, has allegorical, symbolical, theological underpinnings. And so you could say that it's an argument against the gospel Jesus for sure. Magne is definitely saying that that's a myth. But that's what all historicists say today, right? Other than fundamentalist Christians. So Magne's book is not a mythicist book. It is not arguing for an alternative origins of Christianity without Jesus. It's not surveying the evidence for and against the historicity of Jesus and coming to a conclusion. It does none of that. So it isn't an example of this. It is interesting that Magne took seriously the possibility that Jesus didn't exist. I think he even mentions some of the earlier mythicist work from long ago. Maybe he didn't. I can't recall. It's been a while since I've read Magne, but no, yeah, it doesn't do any of that. So I do think it's interesting that he at least tips a hat to mythicism. That's a piece of history there, and that it passed peer review. Right. That's another example that the academics do take this seriously. But since he's not assiduously arguing for it, he's just offhandedly mentioning it as a possibility. that's not really a big deal. And it's certainly not a peer-reviewed argument against the historicity of Jesus. So no one had done that since Drev's time, exactly like Chrissy says. I am the first one to do that. Now, there is an author that we could include, which is Thomas Brodie. He published a memoir shortly before mine. I think the book was 2012, maybe 2010. I can't remember the exact year it came out. There's a memoir where he talks about how he came to believe that Jesus didn't exist, and how he reconciled his Christian faith with that. And he gives some examples of the evidence that convinced him. So that would be like the first, we could say, peer-reviewed attempt to argue this. But his book actually doesn't systematically argue it. He doesn't survey all the evidence for and against Jesus. He doesn't propose an alternative theory of the origins of Christianity. He doesn't explain how Christianity arose without Jesus. All he does is say there are some of these attributes of the epistles and the gospels that make me suspect that there wasn't a Jesus. And that's really all. And it's more of a memoir. It's more of a biography, an autobiography of his scholarly quest. And I do think he intended to publish a more thorough study that was an actual proper study of the question of the historicity of Jesus. But the Catholic Church shut him down. They forced him into retirement and silenced him. He can't publish anymore. So I think, he shot across the bow with this memoir, got shut down. He had to decide either publish or accept a pension. And I think he took his pension, and I can't disagree with him. That's what you got to do in that situation. So, but anyway, so Brodie would be more credible. Magne is not an example. Brodie would be a better example of someone who published before me. But because he didn't publish a systematic study of the evidence for and against the historicity of Jesus, he did not propose an alternative theory of the origins of Christianity without Jesus. It doesn't really satisfy the category in the way that Drev's does, or I do, or Lataster does. So that's why I don't count him in the list of peer-reviewed scholars. But it's worth pointing out that book also does exist.
Yeah, and I found that kind of hilarious there, that because it just kind of seems like almost like a personal stab just in your direction.
Right. No, it's very emotionally driven, which I think is another thing to look for, because this is another typical Chrissy Hansenism. Is she makes these exaggerated assertions in a sort of snarky way that are false, and then surrounds them with these minor true facts. Right. And then when you go and check, you find out like she's massively misrepresented the evidence. That is very common. I find she does that a lot. So often she'll make these broad, confident assertions that are not true, or are only half true, and importantly half true, not trivially half true. And so you got to be on your eye out for that. Like I said, I'm not saying that everything she says is like that, but she does that a lot, enough that you really do need to check her. And in some cases, it's hard to do. Magne's book is not easy to get. Right. So it could be hard. And I can't even remember. Well, his earlier work is in French, but, so it can be difficult to get at, let's put it that way. And how do you verify? Like, you got to read the whole book to verify the claim. This can be done. But most people aren't going to do this. And so it's easy to get away with these kinds of exaggerated false claims, relying on that people aren't going to fact check you. But I think people need to be responsible, and you just have to fact check people. And I encourage people to fact check me, like, do it, because then you'll get a sense of like, how often am I inaccurate or accurate? You'll get the same sense for Hansen, and then you'll be able to compare which of us is usually telling the truth about things.
Yeah, I mean, just riffing off that for a second, whenever I go to write a response to a video or something like that, I mean, I do use you as a good source. But one thing that I always do, not only for you, but for anybody else that I look at, I always make sure to check the footnotes, check the references, and then make sure that I understand, like, where you're getting this from, that I can find it and everything like that.
Yeah. Because have I described it correctly? Does it say something that's actually damning that I've left out? You should definitely check that stuff. It is worthwhile checking that stuff. And that's how you get a sense of a scholar's reliability, is if you keep checking them, you start to get a sense, right? Like if they check out a lot, well, then now you're looking at a reliable scholar. If you start catching them, fudging a lot, well, now you know they're a fudger, right? So like you start to get a sense of like the general reliability of a scholar the more you fact check them. And I highly encourage doing that, especially if you're going to do these kind of like videos that you do, where you really got to have it, right? You better have the goods to succeed at it. And you do that really well, which is, I've used that as an example that how well you do that is exactly how people should do that. I've used other YouTubers or podcasters as examples in some of my blogs on critical thinking. Sean, the YouTuber Sean, is an example. He doesn't do this stuff. He does political and social commentary, but his skill at debunking and his carefulness with argument, making sure he's fact-checked things and so on, rather than just trusting a scholar based on the prestige, which is this whole argument from prestige problem that I'm seeing happen a lot. That rather than trust someone just based on their prestige, trust someone based on their proven record of reliability. And the only way to have a proven record of reliability is if you doubt them enough to fact check them enough that you can establish what their record is. And so I definitely encourage that people do that. And that is the point of having the footnotes and having the careful documentation. I've made this point a lot about like other mythicists who don't publish under peer review. Not all of them, but some of them, the worst ones especially, don't carefully demarcate which claims they're making are facts and which are just theories or speculations. And then they don't give you a breadcrumb to check. Right? They'll just make these wild assertions and then move on. And then you're like, well, how do I check that? Right? Like I need a reference. I need to be able to fact check what that is. A good scholar will carefully distinguish in their text between hypothesis and fact, between a conclusion that is argued for and a conclusion that is just plainly obvious, right? They'll make that distinction very clear to you. And then when they're talking about an argument or a conclusion, they'll give you the argument or conclusion so you can vet the logic yourself. And when they're talking about a fact, they'll give a citation so that you can breadcrumb it. You can follow the citation and find out if that fact is a fact, right? That's what good scholars do. And a good scholarship will do that consistently. Bad scholarship won't do that consistently. And that is one way to actually tell the difference between good and bad scholarship when it comes to formal academic arguments and papers and things.
Yeah, and I was going to bring this up because it's something you gave me right before the stream, and this kind of fits in well with what we're talking about here.
Right.
I'm wondering if you can kind of explain what we're looking at in this document.
Yeah, can people read that? I guess they can if they have the whole screen up. Yeah, this is one of the papers that I address in the article I did on Chrissy Hansen's articles. So you can find this on my discussion of it on the blog with further links where I discuss the issues. So if you want to deep dive this, you can go to that article and find all the links there and deep dive it. But this is an example of how Chrissy Hansen tells lies. So she'll say, like right here, that so we're talking about the rank Raglan. We got to fill people in if you don't know what we're talking about. The rank Raglan archetype, this hero type, is this 22-point feature, sort of this typical hero that keeps getting replicated. So a lot of mythical heroes have these 22 features, or at least have more than half of them. So there's a lot of mythical heroes get conformed to this type. I use this on the historicity of Jesus to create a database that we can actually get statistical results with. How often are historical people conform to this type? And the reason I use this type is because it's very clear. It's hard to be in it accidentally because there's so many points that you have to satisfy. And then there's so many who satisfy it. It's very unusual, and it has like 15 members. A lot of mythotypes don't have that many members. That's actually a really large number for when we're working with ancient history and material. So that's actually a large set for our purposes, for ancient history purposes. You have to use a large margin of error here, but you can actually talk about how often did that happen. So it gives you a useful proxy for how often do historical people get that mythologized. Not necessarily how often do historical people get turned into a rank Raglan hero, but how often do they get mythologized so heavily that they end up like a rank Raglan hero, something like that. And so someone who's been made a rank Raglan hero, you can say, wow, most people who were turned into rank Raglan heroes didn't exist. And that's a fact. You can look at the documentation, I document it and so on. Most, if not all, the people we know, other than Jesus, and Jesus is the variable, right? So we're not going to make any assumption about whether Jesus is one or the other, but all the others, we have no evidence they were historical people. We have a few people who were historical who come close. So like Mithridates and Alexander the Great, they don't score over half, they score under half, but they come close. So that's why I actually allow for a certain number of historical people to have satisfied it, even though we don't have any concrete examples of them doing so. I allow 1 out of 3 could be historical persons. So I'm already accounting for the possibility that Mithridates and Alexander fit the type, even though they don't really, but they come close at least. So it's an example of how that can happen. And I talk about other aspects of this, like there's tons of aspects of the argument of anachronism. You can't use examples from the modern times because it's completely different historical context. You can only use examples that are pre-Christian, because after Christianity, the tendency is to make everybody conform to Jesus, and Jesus is already a rank Raglan hero, so it's just de facto they're going to be rank Raglan. So the cultural context has radically changed after Christianity becomes normed. So anyway, there's a lot of these methodological issues that Chrissy Hansen also fucks up. But this particular statement here, where she says that Lord Raglan's work has since been widely dismissed by folklorists and mythologists. And then she says, however, where it has seen a lasting impact is in historical Jesus studies, et cetera, et cetera. Now here she makes a statement. Now this, if anybody who reads this is going to think, I'm pretty sure what you're going to say is, oh, so the archetype has been rejected. The rank Raglan archetype has been rejected by folklorists and mythologists. That's what it seems like she's saying. That is false. That is not the case. If you notice the previous sentence, she ends with which he argued was based in ritual. So there's a key moment here where this is a misleadingly worded statement that's going to mislead everybody, and I think it's intentionally misleading everybody because I think Chrissy Hansen is often careless with this kind of stuff. What has been rejected by Raglan's work was his belief that the archetype referred to a ritual, a universal religious ritual. That has definitely been rejected. Nobody adopts that, and I don't use it, so it's not relevant, right? So we only use the archetype. The archetype is still fully accepted. No one has rejected it that I know of other than Chrissy Hansen. And she cites 2 people, like in here, footnote 3. So what I did is, so first of all, I read that, and I'm like, I've read tons of folklorists and mythologists. They are all pro rank Raglan. They all support their archetype. I've never even encountered anyone who doubted it, other than Christian apologists, right? It's like James McGrath and stuff like that. But actual serious folklorists and mythologists, who are actual, peer-reviewed experts in this field, no, the archetype is standard in the field. It's not questioned. So I was very doubtful. It's like, okay, how can? And also the first listed is Alan Dundas. So note 3, Alan Dundas. So Dundas is famous for being the person who first did a published study showing that Jesus conforms to the archetype, right? So Dundas clearly, I'm like, there's no way Dundas said that the Raglan archetype was rejected. He's the one using it, right? That doesn't make any sense. So I hadn't read Interpreting Folklore. So I'm like, gosh, does he say something in Interpreting Folklore that I didn't know? And so I went and got it and I looked. No, he doesn't say this. He doesn't say this at all. In fact, everything he says in the pages cited, including 231 that Hansen has put in brackets to like, oh, page 231, you really got to focus there. No, he's supporting rank Raglan's the archetype. He's totally for the archetype. He does question the ritual aspect of it. He points out that that's been rejected. Yeah, we all reject it. I don't use it, right? But the archetype has not been rejected, right? So then this is a paper about the archetype. So we're supposed to only be talking about the archetype. So that is basically a lie. That is definitely at most charitable. It is fatally misleading, the way that Chrissy Hansen has worded this. I had not read Zumwalt, so I checked Zumwalt. She does the same thing. She's pro archetype and against the ritual thesis, but we all agree that the ritual thesis is not true. So the 2 sources, neither one of them say the thing that Chrissy Hansen is giving the impression of having said. They say the opposite. And so then what I did is I went like, okay, look, I'm going to look for rank Raglan in JSTOR. So that's JSTOR, which is one of the major catalogs of journal articles. It's not the only one, and it's not complete, but it's pretty big. It covers a lot of journals. And I searched this, and I could not find. I looked through hundreds and hundreds of articles, and I could not find a single article doubting the rank Raglan archetype. I found 2 articles that supported it, and supported it without question. They didn't say like, "Wow, this is doubted. I better defend it before using it." No, they said like, "Oh yeah, just according to the rank Raglan archetype. Here, I'm going to use that in my analysis." They just take it as rote, that it's exactly as I did, that this is just established. And I stopped at that point. Like I could have kept going, but I couldn't find any examples of scholars who've rejected the rank Raglan archetype. I only found scholars who supported the rank Raglan archetype. Dundas, Zumwalt, the 2 others that I found, that I cite in the article on Chrissy Hansen. So this is an example of how Chrissy Hansen lies, and you wouldn't know unless you checked. You would have to go check Dundas. You'd have to check Zumwalt. You'd have to do a JSTOR search and find like what our folklore is saying about the rank Raglan archetype. Is she actually accurately representing what the field says? No. And so that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. Like when you fact check people and you find that, and then you keep finding it, like you find it one time, okay, but you keep finding that happening over and over again. And there's a few other examples that I give in my article. That starts to indicate that you're looking at an unreliable scholar. Even if a lot of other stuff they're doing is solid, you now know that you've got to doubt them. You've got to fact check their shit, especially if it looks suspicious or convenient. Anyway, that's just an example of what I think Chrissy Hansen does. And like I said, not everything she does is like that. It's just she does it enough that it's a problem. And that means you do need to fact check her like probably all the time, I think, before relying on anything she does.
Yeah, I mean, just in tonight's live stream, we've seen her do it with Trifo, or Justin Motter's dialogue with Trifo, and then the example with the rank Raglan.